Okay, I just came back from round 5 of the Canadian Open. This time around I got paired with yet another Grandmaster, this time against a famous Cuban champion, Ronaldo Vera, who is also at 3 out of 4 points. By the way, for this round and the future recaps, I will be putting the player scores next to their names so you guys can see where we're at in the tournament. But anyway, this game, the opening was a little bit disappointing for me as I prepared the night before just for a little bit. I saw that as white, he plays 1d4 for the most part. But at the board, I was surprised when I saw a knight f3 on the board. I wasn't sure that he has played this in the past. Maybe I should have looked at it, but I mean, anyway, I played d5 here as I always do, and he plays 2c4, the ready. Now, I wasn't sure what he's going to go for after d4, which is what I normally play here. If he's going to play like a normal Benoni with g3, there's also a sharp line following b4, and here I play g5. A nice counterattack on the other flank. There's also e3, which is a little bit of a quieter variation, and there's a couple other minor moves as well. But he chose to go g3 here, and here it's important actually to start with knight c6, as I did in the game, because white has not committed any of his center pawns yet, so you don't really want to, there's no real need to support the pawn on d4 just yet. With another pawn. So knight c6 keeps an eye on this, and you want to play e5 as soon as you can. So bishop g2 was played, e5, d3 in order to stop e4. Now white actually can get away with castling here. This is a line. Although this does allow e4, and following knight e1, you don't actually defend the pawn because that's a waste of time. Instead, you want to just go h5. This is the whole justification of this quick central push, because you want to just go h5, h4, and deliver mate. But he just prevents that with d3. Oops, sorry about that. He goes d3 here to prevent that, and then that allows bishop to b4 check, which is the most precise move here. Because no matter which way white decides to block, in this case he does it with the knights, I follow up with a5, and now the point of a5 is that when a3 comes, I just drop my bishop back, and then there's no b4. You just want to prevent b4 as you would in a normal Benoni. So this is pretty much just a reversed Benoni. So a5, castles, knight f6, and then he plays knight e1. Now I know that this is an idea with the colors reversed, just moving your knight back. You can either go to c2 later, or you're just freeing up the f4 break. So I wasn't really sure what he's trying to aim for, but in either case, I wasn't too worried about this move. I wasn't sure what he's going to go for exactly just yet, but I mean, this is just a fairly typical move in the Benoni. So I decided to draw my bishop back to e7 on my own terms, because I know that he's probably going to play a3. And I just do this preemptively because why not? This is all fine. And then he continues with knight c2. So this knight is useful here because it prepares the a3 b4 break. Because typically what would happen with the knights here is that in a normal Benoni, the knight would go from b1 to a3 and then to c2. But in this case, since he went knight bd2 to block the check, he can no longer get the knight back to the desired square on c2 just yet. So he does it this way. Knight c2, I castle, and now he's just going to prepare, slowly but surely he's going to prepare a3 and b4 with moves like rook b1 and b3 to start. So he starts with b3. If you start with a3, maybe there's, whenever he goes rook b1, I might be able to just play a4, which would rule out the b4 push for good. So he starts with b3. Now here is a critical moment here, at least in the context of this game. What black should really be doing here is he should just sit still and just sit on the position, because right now white is refraining from opening the position. He doesn't want to go f4, he doesn't want to go e3 really, he doesn't want to do anything. The only thing he wants to do right now is to open up the queen side, and if white is able to successfully open the queen side and get these pawns marching down the board, then he can create some serious counterplay. While what black should do is he should try to develop his remaining pieces, and set up some sort of coordination in a way that allows him to eventually prepare the desired pawn break in this position, which is e5 to e4, getting rid of a weak pawn and opening the center. So that's what Black is trying to do. He wants to open up the center so that his pieces will come out in full force. So here I made a, probably this was my worst move of the tournament so far. I went with pawn to a4. Now, at first glance, you may look at this and you're like, oh, this move is clever because he cannot push b4 thanks to the fact that White has not played a3 yet. He decided to go b3 first. So by that measure, this is somewhat of a logical move because what I had planned if he had taken on a4 is, of course, you don't want to take right away because of knight takes d4 and you lose material. So instead, you would just prepare it with bishop to d7, and now you're threatening to recapture because knight takes d4 will happen. And let's say White somehow finds a way to defend it. I don't know how he would do that in this case, but worst case scenario, I have rook a6, queen a8, and eventually this pawn will just fall. So I wasn't concerned about b takes a4 for a multitude of reasons. So he played the move that I expected, rook to b1. Now here was the position that I really overestimated for Black. I thought this was, still really good for Black since you're about to take the a file, and while it's unclear where Black's counterplay is where White's counterplay is gonna be, and as long as I have a firm grip on b4, I felt that my chances were pretty nice. But you'll soon see why this turned out to be quite poor for me. So ab3, and now if I do nothing, he's going to play b4. And in general, the structural transformation is heavily in White's favor because he has simplified this situation on the queen side. He now has two really nice pawns here going down the board, kicking my pieces back, and eventually White's going to untangle his pieces somehow, and he's going to contest the a file where I am just too slow to really react to this basic plan. So after ab3, my whole idea with this a4 move is once I take on b3, I would stick something on b4. So I went knight b4. Now, of course, White should not take this because that kind of justifies my whole idea. I could just trade this off, and if all the pieces come off on the queen side, then it's very unlikely that I'll find a way to lose this. So he plays a very precise move, knight to f3, and now this is a problem because after knight f3, I just don't have a comfortable way to defend the pawn. Now, for instance, queen d6 just fails to knight takes b4, and then knight e5, or the other way around. Bishop d6, of course, fails for the same reason, the overloaded piece. So the only real way I have to defend this is knight to d7, and this was very clever by White because now my knight is blocking my bishop, and as a result, my whole coordination of pretty much all my pieces here on the last two ranks is just really bad for me. And this pawn, especially on e5, is quite weak, and it's just not a reliable. This knight on d7 is just not a very reliable defender of that pawn. So after knight d7, now it continues with bishop to d2. At this point, I sort of figured that things were probably trending in the wrong direction, but I was still hopeful because I have this move c5. It's really my only chance here. I have to support that knight, and my idea is that if he takes with, let's say, the bishop, after pawn takes, I can eventually play moves like queen b6, queen c7 to defend some of these pawns. And then I would just have a really nice outpost on c5 for my knight. Let's say if I somehow play queen b6, f6, rook to a2 or to a3, and in conjunction with knight to c5, I feel that I have good chances for counterplay. But this whole premise was flawed from the start because, well, again, there's a multitude of reasons, but first of all, this structural transformation is terrible for Black because now he's just left with a knight that can't really go anywhere because it's stuck defending this pawn. This bishop is really bad, this bishop is also really bad. And my queen doesn't really have any way to infiltrate. My rooks are terrible because he's going to be able to trade off my only active rook with rook to a1 as he plays in the game. And now you quickly start to notice that Black's position is just really bad now. Things have clearly gone wrong, and it all started because of this poor decision to open up the queen side like this with a4. Let me just quickly show you what I could have played differently. I think the engine gives many different setups for black that give him a modest advantage, but one of the cleanest I think is just bishop f5. And let's say a3, I'm just making some moves, queen d7, and you can see how quickly black is developing here. The c6 knight is remaining to defend the pawn, and white is just too slow to prepare the b4 brick. So let's say he goes rook to b1. Now I can play a move, let's see here. I can play, let's say, rook to a to e8. I can just abandon the queen side completely, because after b4, takes. I can really do anything here. I mean, I think a better move was rook f to e8, just to keep the a file open like this. And after b4, takes, I can, let's say, go bishop to f8, over protecting this pawn, and maybe preparing e4. And following b5, knight d8, I think black is just better here because there's a c5 outpost for the knight. After, let's say, rook to a7 or rook b8, I go knight e6, knight c5, and eventually e4 will come crashing through, and that will be bad news for white. So something like this was easily findable, and I was just too hasty in going a4. But to see how the rest of the game unfolded, I went c5 here, as I said, and then here was another mistake by me. After rook a1, probably what I should have done is either traded, let's see here. Yeah, trading is fine, and then something like queen b6 to overprotect the pawn, followed by, I don't know, some f6, and then I can move the knight out of the way. Just some sequence of moves that trades pieces and tries to hold, right? But what I did is I went rook b8, and now this move just concretely loses a pawn, among other moves. This isn't even the only move to prove a decisive advantage, but following queen e1, this is pretty much lights out. I mean, the engine's saying this is not even the most accurate move. I think actually e3 was better. And I saw this move, and I was just preparing to play. I was planning on playing something like queen b6, and now this pawn, and then following rook e1, bishop to f6. You know, I would maybe play knight to c5 and get my bishop out, but I'm seeing now that bishop f4 just like wins in the spot, so that just did not work at all. Anyway, I should have taken on a1. Instead, rook b8 came, and now he plays queen to e1. And there's simply no way to defend this pawn, because following queen b6, there's rook a4, and the edge is actually saying this is probably what black should have done to try to hold, but it seems very skeptical at best. Let's say rook b4, knight c5 would come, rook b4, queen c7, let's say rook b5 to get out of this discovery, bishop d7, rook a5, b6, and something like rook to a3, or not rook a3 because of knight d3, but just some other rook move. And seems to be good for, or hold on here. No, okay, sorry, this was the line that was good for black. Okay, so apparently there was a variation. This nearly equalizes, although there is a nice trick. Oh, nice trick, knight e5 because of bishop f4. Okay. I mean, I don't know. This seems to be quite bad for black, but apparently it's only like plus 0.5. But regardless, I did not see this variation, and I decided to go for some counterplay with b5. But tactically, this doesn't work in the slightest because, I mean, my opponent probably calculated like the full 10-move sequence to just get a very nice endgame here. And there's just nothing I could do. So following bishop takes b4, I can take on c4 immediately, but after bishop e7, queen e7, bc5, bc4, white is clearly a pawn up, and you just have this passed pawn, and yeah, black is just completely hopeless here. So instead I took on b4 first. I thought I was a little bit clever. I thought I was still somewhat fine because I do have some pressure. But now you see the big problem is that this whole knight f3 idea turned out to be quite favorable for white. Because now this knight is stuck defending this, and this bishop wasn't able to get out in time. And now this is just really sad for black. So he plays a very precise move here, rook f(c)(1). You don't want to spend time defending this pawn. I mean, you can. Rook f(b)(1) is playable, but this gives black some, some hope for counterplay following bishop to b7, and with rook to c8 coming next, I find it difficult to prove anything decisive for white here. So after queen b6, he goes rook f(c)(1), and I thought this endgame was completely fine after queen takes b3. The reason being is that after here, let's say he plays something to pressure my pieces here. I don't know what he would play. Let's say rook a5. I would start with something like rook to d2 in order to counterattack the pawn. You don't want to go f6 right away because I think knight takes d4 is just crushing because of bishop to d5 check. So I get out of light squares with rook to b2, and following, let's say, king f1, I can go f6, and I thought this endgame was holding. I mean, my pieces are a little bit clumsy, but if I can get knight b6, bishop b6 in, then it's all of a sudden it's not so clear for whites. So we traded, but now he plays rook to a7. Now here was the moment where I truly knew that I was basically screwed. Now the engine actually marks this as a blunder for whites for some reason, which I'm not really sure why, but because it seems like a completely natural move. But apparently, this is still a winning endgame for whites, thanks to his more active pieces and this annoying pressure on the weak e5 pawn. Because if e5 falls, then d4 will fall, and so will the game, of course. Now here, I was really thinking he was threatening rook takes c8, rook c8, and rook to d7. But apparently that endgame with the two minor pieces against the rook is completely holding for black, because I would go rook to c1 check, bishop to f1, and then f6. Because don't forget that white also has some back rank issues. So after f6, I can double up the rooks. I can go rook b2 even just to take on e2 there, and black would have sufficient counterplay for the pieces. To show what I mean, let's just play some random move. I don't even know what move I would play, but let's play this. Because takes, f6, sorry, not f6. Rook to c1, bishop to f1, f6. Again, with rook b2 or rook b1, this would be fine for black. So I misevaluated that position there. So after rook a7, I played bishop to b7, which just loses on the spot. I was also looking at rook to b7. I thought this is my only other alternative, but eventually I found this variation with rook to a8. And I think actually there's multiple winning paths for white, like let's say knight b6. The cleanest, I think, is just rook to a5, where there's no way to defend the pawn. You can't go f6 because of the hanging rook on b7. You can even play a move like rook c8, or maybe not. After f6, you'd probably just sacrifice your knight somehow, or I don't know. This is just really bad, regardless. So rook b7. On the other hand, bishop to b7 loses more quickly because of knight takes d4, which I just missed in my calculations. But at that point, my pieces were already, very clumsy, and it was unclear what I was really going for. Even if I don't blunder this, this trick here on d4, my position is still really, really bad because of this annoying pressure on the 7th rank. Again, he just has all these open files, and my rook on f8 is a non-factor here. So I was actually thinking maybe he'd play knight d2, but then I saw rook to b5, and it's not so clear all of a sudden. My other idea with bishop to b7 was I just wanted to take this knight on f3, so I was kind of hoping that he would just allow that, but knight takes d4 is simply a cold shower that I couldn't recover from. So bishop b7, knight f6. One last trick is maybe I can gang up on the e2 pawn, but this is very trivial. Rook c4, attacking the pawn, and I cannot defend it. Well, first of all, not only is there rook a4, but the simplest is just rook to d4 on pain of the back rank issues that I'm facing. So the game ended after rook c4, rook b2, my last move, and then bishop to f3. I resigned because I'm just 2 pawns down, and this bishop is just too good. but yeah, I learned a lot from this game. I learned that, especially that I'm not as good at Benoni structures as I thought I was. I clearly need to work on this from either side, and yeah, in general, I'm just really disappointed that I played a4 here. I mean, this is only a thing that you can see in hindsight, but move like a4 is just really poor, and not something a player of my caliber should be playing. Because this, again, for the reasons that I explained earlier, it just opens up the queen side, and that's not the side of the board where I want to be playing on. So, well, that was the game. Now I'm at 3 out of 5 points, and I will get my pairing for tomorrow at some point. So I'll be back for that.